Darkness. Humanity emerged from darkness. From the era when we believed the world was formed from a vanquished sea monster. From the era when we believed the gods hurled thunderbolts from mountaintops. From the era when we believed dragons stalked the skies. And then, the darkness was broken. Enlightenment. We cured diseases, landed on the moon, decoded the genome, and gave the world the internet, where everyone started arguing about whether the earth was flat. Because in an age of endless information, no one knows what's true anymore. Here in the early days of the 21st century, we are in a golden age of knowledge. There are more highly trained researchers working today than at any point in history. There are nearly 3 million academic papers being published every year, and volumes of information on anything we care about, from black holes to the Byzantine Empire, are only a click away. And here's what's weird about this. It sucks. Yes, we're all kind of carrying the Library of Alexandria around in our pockets, but it's a little like if the library was run by monkeys who were drunk. There's an extraordinary amount of valuable knowledge right at our fingertips, and an extraordinary amount of pure garbage. And these days, it can feel almost impossible to tell the difference. To understand just how big this burden is, consider the following. It's estimated that in our perpetually online era, humans process about 74 gigabytes of information every day. To put that in context, the researchers behind the study that yielded that number noted that 500 years ago, 74 gigabytes would be roughly the amount of information someone would consume in their entire lifetime. We're just asked to deal with an overwhelming amount of knowledge, which is not necessarily to say that the 1500s were some golden age, but at least they didn't have to try to remember who Ice Spice was. And trying to parse all that information to figure out what's real and what isn't can feel like a full-time job, especially because the fake stuff has an advantage. It's more popular. A 2018 MIT study found that false stories on Twitter moved 6 times faster than true stories, and were 70% more likely to be shared. Why is this happening? And what can we do about it? Those are the questions that animate the legal and health scholar Timothy Caulfield in his 2025 book, The Certainty Illusion: What You Don't Know and Why It Matters. And as he points out, there are a couple of big problems here. The way that this overwhelming information environment allows other people to deceive us, and the way it allows us to deceive ourselves. Let's start with the people and institutions spreading false information. There's a lot of ways this can happen, and it's worth noting that they're not always malicious. One issue is that lots of things get lost in translation, because the people who are responsible for explaining complicated research don't always understand it that well themselves. This happens even in elite institutions. For example, one study found that 40% of university press releases around biomedical and health research done on their campuses contained health advice that was exaggerated relative to what was actually in the underlying studies. This is also a recurring problem in the media. The problem is that scholarship thrives on nuance. This might be true under these conditions, and that doesn't get you a headline that anybody will click on. You can see this in a field like climate change, where a sober study might say we have medium confidence this will increase the frequency of extreme weather events, and then a news report will turn it into storms are getting worse, and then by the time it's bouncing around Facebook, it's grab the dog, Miami will be underwater in 36 hours. In other cases, though, we really are being manipulated on purpose. The news media, for example, thrives on negativity bias, the fact that bad news gets more viewers. Research has found that all around the world, the average human is more physiologically activated by negative than by positive news stories, which is why you'll never find a newscast that opens with the fact that these two are friends. Storytellers of various stripes exploit the fact that our brains are much more wired to respond to narratives than to cold hard facts. To give you a disturbing example of this, research found that a 2017 Netflix documentary about nutrition that was riddled with errors At one point it said that eating an egg a day was as bad as smoking 5 cigarettes. It was so psychologically effective that it actually changed the views and behaviors of students who were studying nutrition. And those students were actually found to know less about the subject after watching it. And to give you an even more disturbing example, a 2023 study found that doctors' beliefs about the effectiveness of various COVID treatments were more strongly predicted by which cable news channel they watched than which scientific research they had read. So next time you have to choose a doctor, maybe ask if they want C-SPAN.
We'll hear from doctors with the Veterans Affairs Department.
But this gets us to the other problem, how we deceive ourselves. Because the same factory presets that make our brains really receptive to stories also make them really bad at distinguishing between what we want to be true and what the evidence actually shows is true. There are a bunch of reasons for this. First, we tend to overestimate what we know. That's what's known as the Dunning-Kruger effect, the tendency of people who know a little bit about a subject to mistakenly believe they know a lot about a subject. And this isn't just a theory. In a 2019 study on GMOs, the people most opposed to genetically modified foods had the lowest objective knowledge and the highest confidence in their understanding. In a large 2022 study across a wide variety of topics like climate change, nuclear power, vaccination, and evolution, the pattern was the same. The strongest opponents knew the least. Because the first rule of the Dunning-Kruger Club is, you don't know you're in the Dunning-Kruger Club. Another factor is that we tend to think that the real problem with misinformation is other people. A 2021 study found most Americans say fake news is a serious problem, but that 3 in 4 of us also overestimate our own ability to spot it. Worse, the most overconfident were also the most likely to believe and spread misinformation. And there's one other factor at work here. We want the things that match our pre-existing beliefs to be true, a phenomenon that's known as confirmation bias. We look for evidence that supports our beliefs, not that undermines it. And when we nevertheless find information that doesn't line up with what we already believe, we either ignore it or reinterpret it so it seems like we were right all along. And to be clear, the big problem here isn't that we're gullible. It's that we're people. It's that we're flawed. It's that we're navigating an incredibly complex world with brains that were originally designed for hit mammoth with club, mammoth fall down. But just because we have blind spots doesn't mean there isn't anything we can do about it. There's a lot of advice you've probably heard before. Check the sources. Consider the totality of the evidence instead of just one article or post. Never trust your Uncle Frank's Facebook feed. But Timothy Caulfield offers one tip that may be most valuable of all. Just take a pause. Ask yourself, how confident am I this is accurate, before you share something online or repeat it uncritically. Research has found that just that simple act of giving it a second thought significantly decreases the spread of misinformation. Because the real secret here is having the humility to acknowledge we could be wrong about something, to recognize just how much we don't know. And just that sober second thought can make it that much easier for us to separate fact from fiction and be more confident in what we really do know. Like that the world isn't flat, and that Ice Spice isn't real. We're pretty sure about that.